They don't break their children with cruelty, they break them with kindness. It doesn't look violent, it doesn't sound abusive, it doesn't leave visible scars. It looks like care, like protection, like love, wrapped in soft words and concerned eyes. And that is precisely why it is so dangerous, because the most destructive patterns are not the ones that scream, they are the ones that whisper, slowly, consistently, until they become the voice inside a child's head. Somewhere in a quiet home, a child reaches for something uncertain, a risk, a question, a different path, and before the thought can fully form, it is gently intercepted. That's not safe. That's not practical. That's not how things are done. The tone is calm. The intention seems pure, but something invisible just happened. A door closed, not loudly, but permanently. This is how weakness is engineered, not through force, but through repetition. You were told that good parenting is about protection, that a good parent shields their child from pain, from failure, from discomfort. You were taught to admire the parent who steps in, who fixes everything, who makes life easier. And on the surface, it feels right, it feels humane. But beneath that surface lies a quiet contradiction that very few are willing to confront, because a life without friction does not produce strength. It produces dependency, and dependency is control. There is a pattern, one that repeats itself across generations almost perfectly. A parent, shaped by their own fears, their own limitations, unknowingly passes those same boundaries onto their child, not as rules, but as reality. The child doesn't question it, because to a child, the parent is the world. Their words are not opinions, they are truths. And so the cycle continues. A child who could have been bold becomes careful. A mind that could have questioned everything learns to stay quiet. A spirit that could have been dangerous becomes obedient. And the tragedy is not that this happens. The tragedy is that it is praised. It is called raising a good child. But what is a good child, really? A child who listens, a child who obeys, a child who does not challenge authority, a child who fits into the system without friction. In other words, a child who does not disrupt the comfort of others. And this is where something deeply unsettling begins to reveal itself. Because when you look closely, you start to realize that most parenting is not designed to build strong individuals. It is designed to create predictable ones. Predictable people are easy to manage. They follow patterns, they seek approval, they avoid conflict, they do not question the structure they are placed in. And in a world that thrives on control, that kind of personality is not just accepted, it is rewarded. But at what cost? Imagine a child standing at the edge of a small decision. Something simple, maybe they want to speak their mind or try something unfamiliar or go against what is expected, and in that moment they hesitate, not because they don't know what they want, but because they've learned to measure every action against one invisible standard: approval. That hesitation, that tiny pause, is not natural. It is learned. It is conditioned over years of subtle reinforcement. A raised eyebrow, a disappointed look, a moment of silence that feels heavier than words. These are the tools, not loud, not obvious, but incredibly effective. Over time, the child begins to internalize this pattern. They no longer need the parent to correct them. They correct themselves. They filter their thoughts, their desires, their instincts. They shrink just enough to fit the expectations placed on them. And this is where the real transformation happens, because now the control is internal. They will choose the safer option. They will avoid the uncomfortable truth. They will silence the part of themselves that wants to rebel, to explore, to challenge, not because they are forced to, but because it feels wrong not to. This is not discipline, this is programming. And the most fascinating part is that it often comes from parents who genuinely believe they are doing the right thing. They are not villains. They are not consciously trying to weaken their children. They are simply operating within a system they never questioned themselves, a system that equates obedience with virtue. A system that fears independence because it cannot control it. There is a certain type of parent who cannot tolerate uncertainty, not in themselves and certainly not in their children. They need things to be clear, predictable, safe. And so they construct an environment where risk is minimized, where failure is avoided, where every path is pre-approved. At first, it feels like guidance, but over time it becomes limitation, because a child who is never allowed to fail does not learn resilience. They learn avoidance. They learn to fear situations where they might not succeed. They become experts at staying within boundaries, at choosing paths where the outcome is guaranteed. And life does not reward that. Life rewards those who can move through uncertainty, who can tolerate discomfort, who can face failure without collapsing. But a child raised in constant protection is never exposed to these conditions, and so when they finally encounter them, they are unprepared. The world feels overwhelming, harsh, unfair. But the world did not change. They were simply never trained to face it. There is also a quieter, more insidious pattern that develops in these environments, a reliance on external validation. When a child is praised only when they meet expectations, when love feels conditional on performance, they begin to associate their worth with approval. They don't ask, "What do I want?" They ask, "What will be accepted?" And that shift changes everything, because now their identity is no longer self-directed, it is reactive. It is shaped by the opinions, the reactions, the judgments of others. They become incredibly sensitive to feedback. A small criticism feels like a personal attack. A lack of praise feels like failure. They are not living, they are performing, and performance is exhausting. It requires constant adjustment, constant awareness, constant suppression of anything that might not align with expectations. Over time, this creates a deep internal conflict. A part of them wants to break free, to express, to take risks, but another part, the conditioned part, holds them back, tells them it's dangerous, tells them it's wrong, and so they remain stuck. Not because they lack potential, but because they were never allowed to trust it. Now pause for a moment and turn the lens inward. Think about your own reactions, your own hesitations, the moments where you held back, where you doubted yourself, where you chose safety over possibility. Where did that come from? Was it truly your decision, or was it a pattern installed long before you were aware of it? This is not about blaming parents. It is about understanding the mechanism, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You begin to recognize the patterns, not just in yourself, but in others. The way people seek approval, avoid conflict, fear, rejection, it all traces back to the same origin. Conditioning disguised as care. And this is where the real question emerges. If you were shaped by these patterns, can you break them? Can you unlearn what has been reinforced for years? The answer is not simple, because these patterns are not just thoughts. They are emotional reflexes. They are embedded in your nervous system. They feel like instincts, even though they were learned. But awareness is the first fracture in the structure. The moment you start to question your reactions, to observe your impulses instead of blindly following them, something shifts. You create space, and in that space, there is possibility. The possibility to choose differently, to speak when you would have stayed silent, to act when you would have hesitated, to take a risk even when every part of you is telling you to stay safe. It will feel uncomfortable, it will feel unnatural, because you are going against a pattern that has been reinforced for years. But that discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that you are changing. And change, real change, is never comfortable. It is disruptive. It is uncertain. It forces you to confront parts of yourself that you have avoided. But it is also the only path to something greater, something authentic. Because at the end of all this, there is a simple, uncomfortable truth. Most people are not limited by their abilities, they are limited by their conditioning. And once you see that, the responsibility shifts. It is no longer about what was done to you, it is about what you choose to do now. Will you continue the pattern, or will you break it? Because the same mechanisms that created weakness can be reversed. The same repetition that installed fear can install courage. The same awareness that exposes limitation can create freedom, but only if you are willing to face it. Not once, but consistently, because transformation is not a single decision. It is a series of small, deliberate choices made in moments where it would be easier to fall back into the familiar, and that is where most people fail. Not because they don't understand, but because they don't act. They return to comfort, to Friedrich-like patterns, to the safety of what they know, even if it keeps them small. They convince themselves that change is too difficult, too risky, too uncertain. And just like that, the cycle continues. They convince themselves that this is just who they are, that the hesitation is part of their personality, that the fear is natural, that the need for approval is simply human. And over time, that lie becomes their identity, but it was never their identity. It was installed, and what is installed can be removed if you are willing to endure the discomfort of seeing yourself clearly, because once you begin to observe your own behavior without excuses, without justification, something unsettling starts to happen. You notice patterns, predictable ones, the same hesitation before speaking, the same internal negotiation before taking a risk, the same quiet voice asking, "What will they think?" That voice feels like you, but it isn't. It is the echo of conditioning, the accumulated weight of years spent adapting to expectations that were never truly yours, and the more you listen to it, the more control it has. So the first act of self-mastery is not action, it is separation, the ability to recognize that your thoughts are not always your own, that your fears are often inherited, that your limits were taught, not discovered. And in that realization, there is a strange kind of power. Because if it was taught, it can be unlearned. But unlearning is not gentle, it is not comfortable. It requires you to confront the very mechanisms that once kept you safe, to question the beliefs that once gave you structure, to step into situations that trigger every instinct telling you to retreat. And that is where most people stop. They touch the edge of awareness and then pull back, because awareness without action is terrifying. It leaves you with a choice. And choice means responsibility. No more excuses, no more blaming the past, no more hiding behind "this is just how I am." Because now you see it, now you understand it. And once you understand something, you cannot unknow it. So what do you do with that? You begin to reverse the process. Slowly, intentionally, relentlessly. Where you once sought approval, you begin to act without it. At first, it feels wrong. Almost like you're breaking a rule. You make a decision without asking, without checking, without waiting for validation. And there's a moment of silence, a tension, as if something bad is about to happen, but nothing happens. The world doesn't collapse, and in that moment, something shifts. A small piece of control returns to you. Then you go further. Where you once avoided discomfort, you move toward it. You choose the harder conversation, the uncertain path, the situation where failure is possible, not because you enjoy it, but because you understand what it builds. Resilience, and resilience is something no one can give you. It has to be earned. Every time you face discomfort instead of escaping it, you weaken the old pattern. You teach your mind that discomfort is not danger, that uncertainty is not a threat, that you can survive and even thrive in conditions you were taught to avoid. This is how strength is rebuilt, not in grand gestures, but in small, consistent acts of defiance against your own conditioning. And then there is the deeper layer, the emotional one, because it is not enough to change your actions. You have to understand your reactions, the way you respond to criticism, to rejection, to failure. These are the moments where your conditioning is most visible. A harsh word lands and you feel it immediately, a tightening in your chest, a surge of defensiveness, a need to explain, to justify, to protect your image. Pause there, observe it, do not react, because that reaction is not strength, it is programming. It is the result of being taught that your worth is tied to how others perceive you. That criticism is a threat. That rejection is something to be avoided at all costs. But what if it isn't? What if criticism is information? What if rejection is direction? What if failure is feedback? When you begin to reinterpret these experiences, you change their impact, you remove the emotional charge, you stop seeing them as threats and start seeing them as tools. And tools can be used. This is where true independence begins, not when you stop needing others entirely, but when their opinions no longer control your behavior, when you can listen without being shaken, when you can be rejected without collapsing, when you can fail without losing your sense of self. That is power. Quiet, controlled, undeniable power. And it is the exact opposite of what most people were trained to develop, because most people were trained to be agreeable, to be liked, to fit in, to avoid conflict. And while those traits may create short-term comfort, they come at a long-term cost. They make you predictable, and predictability is weakness, because anything predictable can be controlled, manipulated, directed, and this is where the darker layer of reality begins to emerge. A person who seeks approval can be influenced by praise. A person who fears rejection can be controlled by the threat of exclusion. A person who avoids conflict can be dominated by those who do not. These are not theories, they are patterns, observable, repeatable, everywhere. And once you see them, you start to understand something that most people never fully grasp. Strength is not just about what you can do, it is about what cannot be done to you. If you cannot be easily manipulated, you are dangerous. If you cannot be easily controlled, you are free, and freedom is not something that is given. It is something that is taken internally through discipline, through awareness, through the refusal to remain what you were conditioned to be. But this path is not easy, because as you change, something else happens. You begin to see the same patterns in others, friend, family, people you once related to. You notice the approval seeking, the avoidance, the fear, and it creates a distance, not because you think you are better, but because you are no longer operating on the same level of awareness. Conversations feel different. Interactions feel predictable and sometimes lonely, because growth separates not physically, but mentally, and that is a cost most people are not willing to pay. They would rather remain comfortable, remain accepted, remain part of the pattern, than step outside of it and face the uncertainty of being different. But if you've come this far, if you've followed this line of thought, if something in you recognizes the truth behind it, then you are already standing at that edge. The question is no longer whether the pattern exists. The question is whether you will continue it, because one day, whether you realize it or not, you will influence someone else, a child, a younger mind, someone who looks to you for direction, for answers, for truth. And in that moment, you will have a choice to repeat what was done to you or to break it, to raise someone who is obedient or someone who is independent, to create comfort or to build strength, to pass down fear or to cultivate resilience. And that choice will echo far beyond a single life, because patterns don't just affect individuals, they shape generations. So understand this clearly. The way you think, the way you act, the way you respond, it doesn't end with you, it multiplies, and if you do not take control of it, it will continue exactly as it has, quietly, systematically, invisibly, until another person grows up believing that their limits are natural, that their fear is normal, that their need for approval is simply who they are, and the cycle continues unless someone decides to stop it, not with words, not with intentions, but with action. Consistent, uncomfortable, deliberate action. So the next time you hesitate, notice it. The next time you seek approval, question it. The next time you avoid discomfort, challenge it, because those moments, small as they seem, are where the pattern either continues or breaks. And if you are serious about change, if you are serious about becoming something more than what you were conditioned to be, then you already know what needs to be done. Not tomorrow, not eventually, now. Because every moment you delay is another moment the old pattern survives, and patterns do not die on their own. They have to be destroyed, deliberately, relentlessly, completely. So decide, right now, are you going to remain predictable, or are you going to become something that cannot be controlled? Because the world does not need more obedient minds. It needs individuals who can think, who can act, who can stand alone if necessary, and that begins with you, right here, right now. Break the pattern.